are beginning with Matthew chapter 8. So we have finished up the Sermon on the Mount. We've summarized the teaching. We took a look a couple of weeks ago, last time we were together, at what the kingdom life looks like. And so if you have those handouts, you can refer to those. And so we see that the kingdom life, that question, what does the Christian life look like? And it gets defined in terms of things you ought to do, things you ought not to do. There's an awful lot of cultural things that come out when we answer the question, what does the Christian life look like? You go around, get people's answers. And that stuff gets engrafted. That isn't really the word I want. But we pick those things up. I still find it a combination of amusing and ironic that we sponsor a father-daughter ball. The Baptist Church sponsors a dance. And for some generations of us, right, we're kind of like, okay, there's a little irony in that, because we were raised that you didn't dance, which is a cultural thing. It isn't, but the way it came, there's a whole bunch of other things that come with that, card playing and dice and all of that kind of stuff. And we have to understand those things are cultural things. But the summary of what does the Christian life looks like, we get the answer to that in the Sermon on the Mount. And we understand that it's not about the external things we say and do. It is about what kind of a person are we. It is about character development. It's about being a certain kind of person. It's not just defined in terms of things that you do and that you don't do. When you fall into that camp, you get to the, do's and don'ts, then we just become like the Old Testament Jews, like the time of the Pharisees. And, we may have a different set of 613 rules, but it comes down to the fact that we'll have 613 rules, give or take a few. And then we will rank them and prioritize them and do all of that, what sin is. And that this is the point. It's about character transformation. It's about the developing of the habits and the actions and the character that is a kingdom person. So when we get to Matthew chapter 8, Jesus is finished speaking, and the chapter 7 ends with, the result was that when Jesus finished these words, the multitudes were amazed at his teaching, for he was teaching them as one having authority and not as their scribes. So there was authority within his message. And then after chapter 8 continues, and when he came down from the mountain, great multitudes followed him. And behold, a leper came to him. There's an introduction here now, and we're going to see three miracles that Matthew kind of highlights here. Gee, she complained last week, now she's complaining this week too? I'm just getting started. Anyway, she thought the sermon was too long last week.
It's a chemistry thing.
Yeah. So there's Matthew records three miracles here that Jesus performs as he's roughly the time. We have to remember Matthew's not necessarily chronological. If you want a chronological understanding of the life of Jesus, you have to get a harmony of the Gospels and see which stories and which accounts, to the best of our ability to figure them out, fell when. But Jesus coming off the mountain, and there are three people that he encounters. Matthew records this, three different people that he encounters, he does something for, but each one of them is unique and significant in its own way. So the first one is a leper. So he comes, and it says this man with leprosy. A leper came to him, bowed down to him, saying, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. And he stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, I am willing, be clean. And immediately the leprosy was cleansed. And Jesus said to him, see that you tell no one, but go show yourself to the priest and present the offering that Moses commanded for a testimony to them. So here it is. Now, leprosy, we don't think much about it. It does still occur in the world. Mostly in third world countries. As I said, we have a friend that was a medical doctor for 10 years in Pakistan, and she said she misdiagnosed the first couple of cases of it she saw. And I'm like, well, they didn't cover that in medical school, huh? She was like, well, not, it's not like a real common thing over here. But in third world countries it is. And it's a category, it's a broad category. It's not called leprosy anymore, it's called Hansen's disease, because there was a Norwegian doctor that studied it. But leprosy in the Old Testament and in biblical times was probably the most feared disease that you could get. And there were different types of it. Some of it, and it manifested itself, of course, in skin dying, getting scabby, like if you had psoriasis or something like that. That's how it would work. But in its worst forms, of course, it's ultimately a nerve disease, damages the feeling you have in your extremities, and then you wind up injuring yourself, and infection, and what is it when your flesh dies? Gangrene, thank you. Gangrene sets in. So in its worst cases, you can lepers would literally have body parts rotting off themselves. And it was incredibly feared, because if you had leprosy, the treatment was to isolate you from everybody and everything. So you were cast out of the camp, or out of town, out of home, and so then the lepers would obviously gather together to try to help each other. So you would have literally leper colonies. And if you did go out in public, there was, according to the Old Testament law, certain things you had to do, one of which was yell out constantly. One is you had to be dirty, you had to make sure that you weren't clean or anything, but you had to yell out, unclean, unclean, leper. You had to be announcing to everybody what your condition was so they could get out of your way. Now, how would you like, when you go to town, to have to walk around yelling out the worst thing you've ever done in your life so that people stay away from you? Yeah. Be a little embarrassing, to say the least. Humiliating. But this is what the lepers had to do. So they were rejected, and people thought, they would be throwing rocks. Get away from me, get away, get away. It was bad. And so it resulted in social isolation, and it resulted in religious isolation. So if you broke out with a case of leprosy, you lost everything. You lost your family, because nobody wanted to touch you. You had to move out of the house. You lost your family. You lost your job. You lost your livelihood. You became just a beggar, whatever you could scrounge up, whatever people would deign to give you, is what you had to live with. You lost all of the social contact. You lost your family. You lost your friends. You lost physical touch. Nobody wanted to touch you because you were filthy. But you also then lost access to the temple, or you lost access to the tabernacle. So not only did you lose contact socially, you lost contact as a family. You not only lost your career, you lost everything. You lost contact with God, because you could not go to the place of worship. You couldn't go to this, you see why this was feared? Why whatever happened, you didn't want people to know that you had this. This was bad. But you add to this not just the social stigma of being a leper and all of its consequences. Within the Jewish mindset was the idea that this was proof of God's judgment on your life. Because there were several cases in the Old Testament where people in acts of rebellion and defiance to God were judged by becoming lepers. So Moses' sister Miriam, as she is withstanding Moses' authority and rebelling, she is struck with leprosy as a judgment by God in her refusal to acknowledge the authority that Moses had over the nation of Israel. King Uzziah is in the temple, and he's the king, and he's trying to offer the sacrifice, which he shouldn't have done. He wasn't a priest. But he was insisting, no, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. And the priests are standing there going, no, you're not. I don't care if you're the king. You're not doing it. And you get this conflict taking place in the temple. And then it says suddenly leprosy broke out on Uzziah's face. And the priests saw it, and they're horrified, and his aides, and they get him out of there, and he lived the rest of his life in total isolation. His son becomes co-regent with him so that he can continue to reign. But he is cut completely off. And then when he dies, he's not buried with the other kings. He's buried in a pauper's grave instead because of his leprosy. So leprosy carried with it a social stigma. You lost your family, you lost your friends. It had a physical stigma to it. Nobody would touch you, wanted anything to do with you. Stay away from me. It carried with it the religious isolation. You didn't have the access to the temple or the tabernacle anymore to worship. You were completely cut off. And to add to all of that, it was like you deserved it because you'd done something and God was judging you. That was leprosy. That was leprosy. So we see this leper come to Jesus. And look at how he comes and what he does. Well, first off, yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
I just want to ask, let's say a parent or like a husband or a wife, mom or dad were to get leprosy.
Yeah.
Any idea what would have become? I assume, leprosy means you're out even with a wife and kids.
Right.
Would that wife be considered a widow? How did that affect the family unit once like a parent or spouse? Any idea?
Well, I suppose there was a lot of range of possibility to that, but obviously, if dad becomes the leper, she's left, now of course part of it's gonna be, well, what's the extended family gonna do? Are they gonna rally around her and help her and support her? And dad winds up living out in the hinterland somewhere, do they bring out and make an arrangement? Dad, we're gonna leave you some food on this rock. Go to the rock tomorrow. We'll leave it today. You go tomorrow and get, I don't know. Okay. I'm sure there was a whole variety of that. In some, I'm sure there were cases where a person became a leper and that was just, they may as well have died. They could just as well have died. Now there were cases where there was a recovery from, because there was different kinds of leprosy. And so so it becomes a word that covers a range of conditions. So maybe what some of it was nothing more serious than a bad case of psoriasis, maybe, which, let's face it, obnoxious but not exactly fatal. And so there were conditions where it was recognized that if you get one of these skin diseases, because we don't know what kind it is, you're still cast out. But if it clears up, you can go, and this is important, you go to the priest. You go to the priest with an offering, and the priest examines you. And if he says in his judgment, yeah, that looks like you're recovered, okay, you can go home, all right. Now, why the priest? I mean, they had doctors, they had people that specialized, in the ancient world, they understood health and, various things. If you broke your leg, you probably didn't go to a priest. There was somebody around that, knew how to set bones and do all of that kind of stuff. Why the priest?
Would it be because the spiritual?
Because it was seen as a spiritual condition.
Yes.
Yes, it was seen as it was seen as judgment by God. And so you go to the priest, which is why Jesus sends him to the priest. Says, take the offering, go to the priest, don't tell anybody. Now that's kind of an interesting little point of view. Why not tell everybody? Well, there was a reason at that point, apparently, but so you get all of this. You get this total physical, emotional, spiritual isolation as a consequence of leprosy. So here's this guy who is a leper. Now, we don't know how many years he'd been a leper, how long, but he was clearly identified as a leper. Jesus has crowds around him. And this guy wants to get to Jesus. How desperate must he have been? Pretty blame desperate. I mean, if you were in that condition, what would your attitude be? I got a moment of hope. There's a glimmer of hope, because in all of the Old Testament that I know of, there are only 3 cases where leprosy is healed. Only 3 in the entire Old Testament. Can anybody name them?
There was a king who was dipped 3 times. I don't remember his name.
Is that Naaman?
That was Naaman, and who was Naaman?
King of Syria?
No, he wasn't king. He wasn't king.
He was a Gentile.
He was a general.
He was a Gentile.
He was a Gentile. He's a Gentile, right? Yeah. And the king of Syria sends him to the king of Israel and says, hey, my general's got leprosy, do what you can to heal him. And the king is like, who am I, God? What am I supposed to do? This guy's just trying to provoke a fight. And Elisha, I think, says, no, don't sweat it. Here, talks to Naaman, go dip in the river 7 times, you'll be okay. And so that whole story. So there's one case.
Was Miriam one too?
Miriam was 2. What's the 3rd case?
Moses.
Moses is standing before God at the burning bush. And Moses, I know what you read this week. The opening chapters of Exodus. Moses is before the burning bush. And God is calling him to go. And he doesn't want to go back to Pharaoh. So God says, okay, what's in your hand? Staff, throw it on the ground, becomes a snake. Moses, runs away from the snake in terror. God says, no, pick it up. Picks it up, becomes a staff. Okay, that's one of the miracles that takes place. And then God says to Moses, put your hand inside your shirt. Put it in your bosom, by your chest. Okay? Puts it in, pulls it out. Snow White with leprosy. Whoa. So, okay, now put it back. Put it back, bring it out, hands healed. And that was one of the signs God gave Moses. Moses, you are a leper, but I have healed you. And so that was one of the signs that were given. So all the Old Testament, where leprosy is common in the ancient world, there's only 3 cases that I can think of where there was a healing from leprosy. So now we come to the New Testament, we see leprosy. And so this guy gets word that, hey, there's a glimmer of hope. There's a glimmer of hope. If I can get to this guy and ask him to heal me, I might be restored. There's a glimmer of hope. Now the question is, how did he hear and all of that? We don't know. It's not given that big a picture. But he's a leper. So how does he come to Jesus? Well, one is he comes with some measure of confidence. I mean, the fact is he came, right? Now, you can easily imagine somebody hearing, the gossip going around amongst the leper community. Hey, there's a guy that's healing. Hey, there's because anything that's going to give you a glimmer of hope, people are going to gossip about. This is the nature of humanity. Here we are. Can you imagine how many of them ran off, tried this, tried that, tried something else, didn't work. Now you hear yet again, hey, here's a chance. Somebody can heal you, And at a certain point you go, yeah, okay, here's another charlatan out there. I don't know. But this guy had the guts to come. He had the confidence to come to Jesus. And then it says, the leper came to him and bowed down, or literally what it says is he worshiped him. He worshiped him. He bowed down. He recognized and acknowledged him as God. So there's worship before the request is made, before anything else happens. He has the confidence to come and he worships. He worships Jesus. And then it says that he was humble. Okay, he did not demand a healing. He didn't do all of that, but with humility, he asked. There was humility in the request. He didn't say, Jesus, prove to me you are who you say you are. If you really are, heal me. There was no demanding. What does he say? He says, if you are willing, you can make me clean. By the way, what is that?
Faith.
Faith. Absolutely. If you are willing, you can make me clean. And Jesus says, I am willing. And he does something. He doesn't just stand there and say, I'm willing to be clean. He touches the guy. It says he reaches out and he touches him. And I don't think we can lose the significance of that. Because Jesus was willing to actually put his hand on this person. The most outcast, despised, reviled, feared type of person. And Jesus was willing to touch him. Now we can talk about what's the kingdom life look like. We get the summary out of the Sermon on the Mount. But what is being introduced here and what we're getting into in this historical section of Matthew is, what does the kingdom life look like from the outside? In other words, what is it, can we see it in others? And here is Jesus living out the kingdom life. And so the leper comes, despised, reviled, feared, the poor guy who is isolated in every sense of the word, cut off from everything that would give him hope in this life, including hope from God. And he comes with confidence to Jesus, he worships Jesus, and with humility he asks, he makes the statement, Lord, if you're willing, which is a demonstration of faith. And Jesus touches him and says, I am willing, be clean. And it says immediately the leprosy was cleansed. He goes in an instant from being filthy and reviled to being clean. Now, if we take that story and we say, how do we apply that in our lives? What application is there of that story to us in our lives? Simple question. Who are we in the story?
The leper.
Every one of us is a leper. Every one of us has leprosy of soul that cuts us off from everybody else and cuts us off from God. And leprosy is the image of sinfulness in the Bible. We are the leper. And so how does Jesus respond to us when we come to him? He touches us. We can come with confidence, understanding we need to come and worship, but with humility, knowing where we are, and in faith asking. So there's his first contact. He comes down off the mountain. Now the interesting question is, why does he tell the leper, who's now healed, don't tell anybody? I mean, first off, don't you think, why would you tell him to do that? Because that ain't happening. If this guy just got healed of leprosy, who's he going to tell?
Everywhere.
Absolutely everybody. Yeah. So why does Jesus say don't tell anybody?
You have huge crowds following already.
Okay?
He doesn't want the notoriety yet.
Wasn't his time yet.
Wasn't his
Yeah.
time yet.
I don't think he wanted people to come to him for healing, because he had a message. He wanted them to hear the message, not to come for just physical things.
Well, maybe. On the other hand, doesn't Jesus, he doesn't say, well, why don't you listen to my teaching and see if you understand my explanation of the law? We'll get to the leprosy later. He doesn't do that, does he? You know. Well, part of the reason we think that Jesus said this is Jesus is developing some notoriety. Because he says, don't tell anybody, see that you tell no one, but, and it's a little bit vague in the Greek, but it can be translated, but first go show yourself to the priest and present the offering that Moses commanded for a testimony to them. In other words, don't stop to see the family and all your friends and everything and then get around to going to the priest. Go to the priest first. And because Jesus is developing notoriety, he's also developing hostility amongst the priesthood, right? Because they're being threatened by him. And if this guy goes in and says, hey, Jesus healed me, what is the priest likely going to say? Yeah, no, I refuse to give you a clean bill of health, back out. But if he just says, hey, I'm healed, I brought the gift, here I am, look at me, okay, you know, I pronounce you clean, then you can say, and oh, by the way, guess who did this, you know. But it was important to get the clean bill of health from the priest first. Okay, so here's the first person. Jesus touches a leper. All right, so then we get to a second story. Now, and when he had entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him. So now Capernaum was the city on the coast of the Sea of Galilee, and it became the headquarters of Jesus' ministry. This is where Peter, Andrew, James, and John were from, this area. Capernaum was a major city, and this kind of becomes the headquarters where Jesus he's constantly coming and going. Because remember, he went to Nazareth, he did some teaching in Nazareth, they tried to stone him, didn't like what the hometown boy had to say in the sermon, so they were going to kill him. He leaves, he goes to Capernaum. Capernaum becomes his headquarters during ministry. Now, Capernaum, the city's been excavated and studied and all this, and there was in Capernaum a military post, we'd call it. So this is the Roman army. Has a garrison there, so it's got troops and all of that. So this is the centurion. I can see if I can spell this right. So he's a Roman officer. A centurion commanded 100 men. So he's in charge of this garrison. He's got 100 men under his command. So what would the corresponding rank in today's military be, roughly? Oh no, this is an officer.
Officer, of course.
This is an officer. Captain probably, yeah. Yeah, a little bit. Larry, what's captain command in the Marine Corps?
Yeah, there are about three units of maybe 30 apiece.
30, so roughly equivalent to a captain. So this guy is the dominant military political figure in the area. Now, generally speaking, what did Jews think of Romans?
Hated.
They hated them. Why?
We're their oppressors.
Yeah. What does this guy represent? Well, all the problems. There's a foreign military occupying force, and this guy is in charge of them. He's the command. His word is law. He doesn't care about any, he is there to keep the peace. And what do you do to troublemakers in the Roman system? You kill them. That's the easiest thing to do. You want to keep the peace? Kill a bunch of the troublemakers, and word will get around. Right? Everybody will fall in line. And so he's a centurion, commander of about 100 men. And we see centurions throughout the biblical story. And the interesting thing about this is, while the Jewish people would have despised this guy, just because of his rank and his position and for what he and his person represented. He represented everything they hated. He represented the power of Rome, the authority of Rome. He's a pagan, not a believer in their definition, all of this. This guy would have been despised by the Jewish people. Now the interesting thing though is when we look through the biblical record, you see centurions pop up several times throughout the New Testament, and they're almost always portrayed in a positive light, which would have contrasted with what the general attitude at the time about them would have been. So the centurion comes to him. See, where am I? Okay. The centurion came to him, entreating him and saying, Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home, suffering in great pain. And he said to him, I will come and heal him. But the centurion answered and said, Lord, I'm not worthy of you to come under my roof, but just say the word and my servant will be healed. For I too am a man under authority with soldiers under me, and I say to this one, go, and he goes, to another one, come, and he comes, and to my slave, do this, and he does it. So this is a man who understands authority, and he has it. He gives a word and people jump. This is how it works. But he comes to Jesus. Now this is interesting. He's not asking for himself directly. Okay? Indirectly, yes, he's asking for something for himself. But ultimately, his concern is for his servant. All right? Now, that's kind of interesting because servants, and Pastor Scott touched on this in the sermon, spoiler alert for second service. The ancient world, the concept of slavery and servanthood. So servants, or slaves, were chattel property. There was no difference between owning slaves and owning cattle. And, a lot of people treated them about the same. So what do you do if you got a cow and it gets sick? Thank you very much. I was going to say butcher it and eat it before it dies because, you hate it to go to waste. But yeah, the horse breaks its leg, what do? Yeah, boom. The servant comes now and he's asking Jesus on behalf of his servant. And he said, my servant is depending on the translation, New American says paralyzed, suffering great pain. So he is interceding. The centurion is interceding to Jesus on behalf of his servant. So then Jesus says, okay, I'll come and heal him. And the centurion's like, no, you're not coming to my house. Don't do that. I understand how this works. He said, I understand how authority works. And so he recognizes in Jesus his authority. So what do you call that when you recognize that inherent authority in Jesus? What is he de facto doing? Which comes from the English word he is, in fact, in his actions, worshiping Jesus. He's recognizing the worth of who Jesus is. And then he makes the request. He asks. He asks with humility. But there's definitely a humility there. I don't think this is false modesty. Jesus says, I'll come and heal him. And the centurion says, oh, no, not under my roof. Whoa. No. No. I'm not worthy of that. He worships Jesus, and then he asks if he would come and heal him. So there's the request. Now when Jesus heard this, he marveled and said to those who were following, truly I say to you, I have not found such great faith with anyone in Israel. Now that's a statement. Who's this guy?
Roman.
He's a pagan Gentile. Why did God create Gentiles?
Somebody had to go to hell.
So he would have somebody to send to hell. Exactly. Within the Jewish mindset, that was the answer. Why did God create Gentiles? So he'd have someone to send to hell. This guy's hellbound. We know it is because he's not Jewish. And not only that, he represents everything I hate in the area of my country. What's wrong with my country at this time? And on. And then Jesus says about this guy, man, amongst Jews, I haven't found faith like this. Wow. So the faith is there. Jesus is amazed. Then he goes on to make this statement. And I say to you that many shall come from the east and the west and recline at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the sons of the kingdom shall be cast out into outer darkness, in that place where there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And Jesus said to the centurion, go your way, let it be done to you as you have believed. And the servant was healed that very hour. So Jesus says, I haven't seen faith like that amongst my own people. And so then he answers the request of the centurion. He heals the servant at that very hour. In an interesting way that he says it. He goes, go your way, let it be done to you as you have believed. Let it be done to you as you have believed. Okay, so there's the second one. So then the third one,
Before you go there, how do you respond to verse 12?
the sons of the kingdom shall be cast out into outer darkness, in that place where there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth.
Who are the sons of the kingdom that he's talking about?
People who think, who believe, because of their genetic makeup or cultural heritage or whatever reason, that they think that they are the ones that are going to get into the kingdom, and they're even convinced in this life that they're part of the kingdom, but they're not. I mean, you know, the capacity for self-delusion is hard to overstate. But there are certainly people who are absolutely convinced that they're okay with God, and they're in, and they got it all taken care of, that have nothing, don't comprehend at all what Jesus has just said on the Sermon on the Mount. And they are doomed to eternal perdition. They're going to hell. It's the same theme that Jesus picks up in chapter 19 or 25 of Matthew, whatever, where the final judgment. And he says, you know, everybody that ever lived, small and great, and are all resurrected. The sea gives up, the grave gives up, everybody that's lived stands before Almighty God. They're resurrected, and it says he separates them, the sheep from the goats. And he says to the sheep, welcome, you know, come into your Father's joy. To the goats, he sends them away to eternal perdition. And what is the response of the two groups? The one group says, whoa, why me? You know, Jesus says, because when I was hungry, you fed me. And when I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. When I was in prison, you visited me. When I was naked, you gave me something to wear. They had lived this out, this kingdom of life. And they're like, really? When did we do that? We missed that. I mean, it was such a natural part of what they were doing, they missed it. And Jesus says to them, when you did it to the least of these, my brothers, you did it unto me. But to the goats, you know, and what do they say? Wait a minute, didn't we prophesy in your name? Didn't we do great works in your name? Didn't we preach in your name? Didn't we? And Jesus says, no. You didn't live it out. When I was hungry, you didn't give me anything to eat. When I was thirsty, you didn't give me anything to drink. When I was naked, you didn't clothe me. When I was in prison, you didn't visit me. And they go, when did we miss that? Well, you were writing everybody else off. Oh, by the way, you wrote me off too. So off to perdition, off to eternal punishment. And so this is where, and by the way, there should be an element of pause in that for everybody, I think. And Christians don't like to hear this, especially my dear Calvinistic friends, who I have tremendous sympathy and agreement with. You know, hey, I got it all done, I'm good. Yeah, well, you know what? You better think about this. Because, you know, there's no do-overs in this life. You get one shot at it. And the teaching is pretty clear about that. That there will be plenty of people who found they had deluded themselves in this life, thinking they were okay with God and they had everything all, every I dotted, every T crossed, and then boom, the judgment comes and they're like, whoops. And there should be some humility in all of us and some pause in all of us. When we start to think we have all the details figured out, we got God figured out, and all of this, maybe not. Maybe not. Well, I'll leave the editorial comments there, but that's the answer to the question, Larry. There's gonna be people in hell that are there because of their self-delusion. All right. Oh, wait a minute. I ignored Kenny all the time. I can ignore Jim for a while. All right, we'll do this one quick. When Jesus had come to Peter's home, so he's on his way, he's getting to Capernaum. Okay, now he's fighting like, I want to get to the house. You know, oh, got to take care of this leper. Oh, got to deal with this centurion. You know, you ever been on your way home and you're just constantly stopped? You got this and this. I want to stop running into people that I know. And in this case, people he didn't know. But anyway, so Jesus had come to Peter's home. He saw his mother-in-law lying sick in bed with a fever. So now, it's mom. And mom has a fever. So she's been sick. So the word that's used here can refer to malaria. It can refer to other kind of diseases when it says she has a fever. Now, when you have a bad fever, what does that do to you?
Slows you down.
It saps your strength. Yep. It absolutely saps your strength. So, here it is. Mom is sick. By the way, when you were growing up as a kid, who would you rather have get sick, mom or dad? Dad in a heartbeat. The house kind of kept going. Mom got sick, that was not a good deal.
Everything stopped, yeah.
Everything stopped. It just wasn't good. So mom, his mother-in-law is sick. She's got a fever. And Jesus touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she arose and waited on him. All right? So you got a woman. You can make some snarky comment about the fact it's Peter's mother-in-law, which there could be some jokes about, but it's his mother-in-law. So here it is. She's sick. She's got this fever. Even when a fever breaks, you've had a fever for a while. I don't know how long she was sick, but it's fever. The fever breaks. How long does it take you to recover? Sometimes days. Yeah, sometimes days. If it's a bad fever, you know, it drains you. And here, boom, she's up on her feet, you know. And when mom gets better, what does she do? Well, she makes supper, of course. You know, finally, you know, nobody's had anything decent to eat, you know. I mean, this is such a normal home picture to me when I read this. Mom's sick, okay. Mother-in-law is sick. And Jesus comes into the home, sees mom lying there, got a fever, boom, touches her, and the fever left her, and she arose and waited on him. You know, talk about a Midwestern mom. But there it is. So he's got this. Now, here's pushing quickly. So I get this. This is granting our culture today. I wouldn't think that I would have to do this, but mom, i.e. a woman. If you're not sure what a woman is, well, I don't know. Anyway, here it is. By the way, what rank did women have in the ancient world? Chattel property. Here's Jesus coming down off the mountain. He's going to Peter's home. And you get right away 3 contacts with people. Leper. Absolutely social outcast, person with no hope, person that was despised and rejected. Boom. Jesus touches them and heals them. Next person, centurion. Pagan, foreign authority, oppressor. Put every adjective you want on that. Jesus heals his servant. Woman, a woman, not a man. She's sick. Jesus touches her. Who is Jesus willing to help and deal with?
Anyone.
I would defy the everyone. Because are there people that Jesus sends away? Yeah, we love God loves everybody, so don't worry about it. Well, not exactly. Jesus is willing to touch, to deal with, to interact with the most hopeless, the most outcast, the most despised, the lowest level people of his day. That's what he's willing to do. What does a kingdom life look like? A kingdom life looks like going to the people who are outside, who are hopeless, who represent everything bad politically, socially, and ethnically that you can think, who have the lowest possible social classes. And Jesus touches them and ministers to what at that moment is their deepest need. At that moment is what he does. What does a kingdom life look like? Well, what is the social equivalent today to leper in our society? You can ask yourself that question. What is the social equivalent today to an oppressive, foreign idea, concept, force that's holding us down? Who are the lowest social class that we have in our classless society? Those are the people that get the attention of Jesus. That's what a kingdom life looks like. It's the first glimpse that we get as Matthew is moving into this, okay, we've got the teaching, now we get the dialogue and the stories as to what happened. All right, let's close in prayer. Father, we thank you for the examples that you give us in the Word. And Lord, may we understand and heed the message that is here. May we have eyes that see people as you see them. And may we respond to them as you responded to them. And may our hearts have that same trusting faith, that confidence, that worship of who you are that these people demonstrated to us. We pray for the worship service that's ahead and ask that it would work to your honor and glory. So we pray these things in Jesus' name.